Charlie the Third, remember one day I told you I would tell you the story of how your dad started in the heating supply business and how he earned the name you gave him one time, Doctor of Furnaces? It all started a long time ago. The exact date was June 1st, 1924. You remember Grandpa told you that he used to manage a florist shop in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. It was nice work, but I realized the opportunity of making more money looked brighter in the heating business than in the flowers. So on June the 1st, I took a job that paid less money than I was making in the florist business. Before leaving, of course, I told my boss 3 weeks in advance that I was taking a new job. My new job took me to Youngstown, and as I was not ready to move to Youngstown, I traveled back and forth 6 days a week. In those days, we traveled from town to town by the way of the interurban electric trolley car. Between Newcastle and Youngstown, they ran every hour on the hour. Every morning at 6 a.m., I boarded the trolley car at the Central Square in Newcastle, and at 7 a.m. arrived downtown in Youngstown. About a block away, I boarded another line, the Youngstown Southern, which took me to East Indianola Avenue on the south side. I arrived about 7:20. We started work at 7:30. This job was to be my training program. I remember when I interviewed Mr. C. Ed Smith, Jr., it was on a Sunday afternoon, and he told me of the needs that his company had for salesmen. They were going to need in the new territories they intended to open. The company I was to work for was called the Banner Mahoning Furnace Company. This was a new company that bought out the controlling stock of a company called the Mahoning Foundry Company. The Mahoning Foundry Company started in business in the early part of the century. They were located a short distance east of the South Avenue Bridge on the Mahoning River. This is now the location of the Youngstown Foundry Machine Company, which is part of the Wien United Engineering Company. They manufactured a cast iron coal-burning furnace called the Mahoning, made in 5 sizes for houses of the small cottage type up to the larger 8 to 10 room homes. During World War I, this company had a contract for making gray iron castings for the United States government and proved to be very profitable. In 1918, they bought 12 acres of land at the Youngstown and Southern Railway and East Indianola Avenue and erected a new foundry and warehouse. The building facing Indianola Avenue was 100 by 240 feet and contained 2 floors, a total of 48,000 square feet of floor space. The rear building was 100 by 150. There was located the foundry, the molding department. Financially, they were in excellent shape. They had took over this new building. When they took over this new building, they were able to write out a check in full to pay the builder, the Austin Company of Cleveland. The failure and the downfall of this very successful Mahoning foundry is an unusual story. At that time, shortly after World War I, the recession and the business depression of 1921, labor unions were just beginning to get a start and were making demands for better pay and working conditions, which was rightfully due the working man. The Molders Union was trying to get recognition from the Mahoning Foundry Company. They could not reach an agreement, so the Molders Union called a strike. The Mahoning Foundry had the backing of the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company that at that time was headed by James A. Camel. Sheet and Tube promised Mahoning Foundry they would give financial aid and brought in non-union molders to try to break the union. During the strike, the non-union men, they were called scabs in those days, lived on the second floor of the building, and the commissary department was set up by the sheet and tube. Army cots were brought in, and meals were furnished, and no one left the plant for weeks at a time. This went on for months. Very little saleable merchandise was produced, and the molders proved to be in a stronger position than the sheet and tube or the Mahoning foundry ever imagined. The strike was eventually settled, but it proved to be a great financial drain on the Mahoning Foundry Company and a loss of prestige of the product. The principal stockholders and the officers of the old Mahoning Foundry Company were Grant Jones. He also had an interest in a piano store downtown, which later became the Yarling and Rain Piano Company. Watt Long, he was vice president and foundry superintendent. Fred C. Knoll, secretary of treasurer, and John Wright, second vice president. The company, the Banner Mahoning Furnace Company, was started late in 1922 and early 23. Officers were Pat McCrudden, president, William Garber, secretary and treasurer, both formerly of the 20th Century Heating and Ventilating Company of Akron, Ohio. C. Ed Smith, Jr., vice president and general manager. The Smith Furnace Company of Newcastle was the largest dealer that the 20th Century Company had at that time, and they were to be big volume customers for the new Banner Mahoning Furnace Company. John Abel, partner in the C. Ed Smith Hardware Company, was also a stockholder, as well as the president of the People's Bank of Newcastle. Neither was active in the running or the management of the operation of the new company. The old owners of the Mahoning Foundry Company were given preferred stock in the new organization. The preceding will suffice for the history of the firm for which I was to begin work on June 1st, 1924. I became interested in my new job because I knew it would lead me to better things. The first week I was given the job of papering warm air pipe. In those days, coal was the only fuel used to heat the homes. Oil and gas had not been developed. Heating system consisted of gravity, hand-fired, warm air, hot water, or steam. Forced warm air systems had not yet been in vogue. The building code required that all warm air pipes in the basement and stacks to the second floor be covered with asbestos paper, and my first job was covering the pipes. Much like a paper hanger applies paper to the wall. I had to I spent about 2 weeks on this papering job. Then I moved up to the assembling warm air pipe. The pipe was made of tin plate, light gauge, in 24-inch sections, and we riveted the sections to make up 6-foot lengths of pipe. The paper was applied and dried, then taken to the job. The installation, the size of the pipes used in those days was 8-inch, 9, 10, and 12-inch. After a couple of weeks in the shop, I was sent out on a job as a mechanic's helper. There we installed the register boxes and stacks to the second floor. That is, in a new house. After the house was plastered and the basement floor was cemented, and the floors were, the first and second floor were down, we installed the warm air heating system. Working in a new house was more pleasant, as it was harder to work in an old house that had no furnace, as we were required to do much cutting of the floor joists and sometimes removing the plaster to get the pipes to the second floor. As this also so it was much dirtier work, as you sure could pick up a lot of dust. My boss's name was Roy McDowell, and he would send me out with a new mechanic every couple of weeks, so I could pick up new ideas from the different men. This work went on through the summer until the end of November, when I asked for a week off, for a lot of reasons. One little reason being that I was not too keen on traveling by streetcar, leaving at 6 a.m. and arriving back in Newcastle at 6 p.m. After the wedding in November the 25th, 1924, and a week's honeymoon, I was back on the job. The day before Christmas, I was told by my boss to come to work on January the 2nd, dressed up and ready to join the sales force. I must tell you about the first furnace sale I ever made. One Saturday evening, I stopped at the Smith hardware store, and Mr. C.Ed Smith Sr. said he had a prospect for me and would I like to call on it. I had been working as a mechanic's helper for about 3 months. This man, the name of this man he gave me, lived in Edinburgh, PA, which is a little village about halfway between Newcastle and Lowellville, Ohio. I jumped at the chance to tackle this prospect. So the first evening I could get the family car, I packed a briefcase with literature, contracts, and so forth, out on my first interview, full of pep and ginger and lots of enthusiasm. I had received instructions on the pricing system, so I was certain as to certain size of furnace that might be required. So much was to be charged for each warm air run and cold air return and so forth. Well, I tried to act like a veteran and a seasoned salesman, presented my sales pitch. It must have worked out because I came away with an order. I had a sizable down payment. Out of this down payment, the firm paid me my first commission. January the 2nd, 1925, we were citizens of Youngstown. When I say we, I mean Grandma and I. On returning from our honeymoon, we settled with Grandma's Aunt Ann, and she and her husband, Uncle Jim, lived in the corner of Spring and Bryson Street on the near north side of Youngstown. Aunt Ann and Uncle Jim planned to make a trip to Miami, Florida, as their son, Joe Gilland, and his wife were established in the real estate business in Miami. This arrangement fell through. They didn't go to Florida, the reason being either the hurricane that hit Miami about that time or the land boom bust. They just don't remember. We were able to rent from W.J. Roberts, president of the Mahoney Bank, a one-bedroom apartment on the corner of Belmont and Park Avenue. This was considered an excellent neighborhood at that time. We bought our furniture and bought a Model T, a coupe, and we were on our way. Forgot to mention, when I moved to the sales force, my drawing account was double what I received as a mechanic's helper. Grandma also held a good job. She was managing a ladies' hat store in Sharon. She commuted by way of trolley from Youngstown to Sharon. I would take her to the trolley in the morning and pick her up at 6 p.m. This job didn't last too long, as we were to have our first baby, our daughter Peggy, born November the 20th, 1925. Where we lived was very convenient, as we had only to walk across the street to St. Elizabeth's Hospital to get our first baby. My first real break was how fortunate to be able to work for a man as my first real boss, Roscoe C. Reed. Everyone nicknamed him Doc, a man of magnetic personality, had super sales ability, and proved to be the best friend I ever had outside of my own family. We later became partners in business. Doc Reed was not a native of Youngstown. His mother lived in Rutherford, New Jersey, where he received his education. He studied music and on to become a professional musician. He attended Dickinson's College at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where he met his wife, Goldie Moomaw, and they were married when they were quite young. Carlisle, PA, is the home of the famous Indian School, where the great athlete Jim Thorpe went to school and played on the famous Carlisle Indian football team. Doc played on this school band and accompanied the famous Jim Thorpe around the area where all games were played. Rosemary will be interested to know that his instrument was the flute, and he was considered a real artist. He also played the piano and could play all the popular songs and ragtime melodies like a real pro. Before making Youngstown his home, he traveled with a circus band. Back in the days of the silent motion pictures, before the invention of the talking pictures, one of the first full-length silent films, The Birth of a Nation, played with a large orchestra. This particular picture about the reconstruction of the South after the Civil War, the flute was the key instrument of this orchestra and contributed to the excitement and the success of this motion picture. Tis an interesting story of how he received the name of Doc. One time he was calling on a furnace prospect, and he had his instrument with him and carried it into the prospect's home. He didn't want to leave it in the car. A little girl about Margaret's age came running across the street to tell her mother the people next door are having a baby because she just saw the doctor go in carrying the doctor's bag. Business conditions were good in 1925 and on through to October of 1929 when we had the stock market crash. Calvin Coolidge was president, employment was high, the building business was booming, many homes were under construction, which made the heating business good. I managed to make friends with many of the leading building contractors and received most of my sales from this group in the new construction field. The furnace replacement market was good, and many of the homes that were constructed years earlier without central heating, and we had a good market for sales there. Living on the north side of Youngstown was not to our liking, as my office was on Indianola Avenue. Also, Grandma was no longer commuting to Sharon, and we had as we had the start of our family. We rented a new apartment on the corner of Hudson and Boston Avenue where we lived when Betty was born. We bought a Peerless 5-passenger sedan which Grandma had to drive as her own. I still use the Ford Model T Coupe in my work. Things were not going too well with the management of the Banner Mahoney Furnace Company. Although the local installation was prospering, and the sales with the Smith Furnace Company of Newcastle were high, to operate a plant of this size required a much larger volume of business. Being an exclusive manufacturer of cast iron furnaces had its disadvantages, as the competition was growing in the use of the steel-fabricated brick-lined boilerplate furnace. Such firms as Lennox of Syracuse, New York, American of St. Louis, Boomer of Massillon were beginning to dominate the market. They also needed customers for gray iron castings used in industry such as the Mahoning Foundry had which was very profitable end of their business. President McCrudden and Secretary Garver didn't have the know-how, and Smith turned out to be a playboy and was involved in a serious auto accident between Akron and Cleveland. He never fully recovered from this accident. The stockholders called for a reorganization. They fired McCrudden and Garver and brought in Carl B. Lockhart, who had operated a foundry for the General Electric Company at Erie, Pennsylvania. Lockhart had some ability as a designer of steel furnaces, and he entered into a contract with the Youngstown Welding Engineering Company to fabricate the furnace body and radiator. Banner Mahoney made the cast iron parts, assembled the furnace. This steel furnace was marketed, but sales never reached the volume needed to show a profit. Lockhart was let go at the expiration of his contract. Fred C. Knoll was brought in. He was the former secretary and treasurer of the original Mahoney Foundry Company. He lasted but a few months and was let go. The First National Bank, headed by Howard Parker, the president, Howard Parker built and occupied the home now owned by Jack Hines in the corner of Oak Knoll and Forest Hill and Forest Glen. Howard Parker, the First National Bank was the predecessor of the present Union National Bank. This bank, in order to protect their interest, ordered the company into receivership. Charles G. Watson, president of the Youngstown Welding and Engineering Company, was appointed receiver, so we had a new boss. Mr. Watson kept the installation department running to liquidate some of the large inventory of completed furnaces, and at the same time sell the company as a going concern. Good prospects were few. I recall one time he had Marty Bentley interested, as his family were anxious to see him get a start in a business venture. Marty later joined Errol Snyder and formed the Snyder-Bentley Wholesale Plumbing Jobbers. Another interested prospect was Herb Owens, owner of the Youngstown Furnace Company. Negotiations went on for months, but they could not reach an agreement. Mr. Watson did a super job of running the receivership. The assets were being turned into cash, and the creditors were being paid, including the Youngstown Welding and Engineering Company and the Sheet Metal Manufacturing Company, which was owned by John and Tom Farrell. They were the first firm that our Johnny Fisher worked for. They sold galvanized sheets. This was the only receivership we could recall where the creditors received their accounts receivable 100% in full. The stockholders did not fare so well. Now comes a part where we form a partnership and enter business. Roscoe C. Duck Reed, Russell W. Mitchell, and myself pooled our assets and engaged attorney Osborne Mitchell to form a corporation to be known as the Banner Heating Company. This was the summer of 1928. The three officers of the new corporation were Charles J. McCrudden, President, Russell W. Mitchell, Vice President, Roscoe C. Reed, Secretary and Treasurer, Margaret Carney, Assistant Treasurer. 33 shares were issued to the owners and 1 share to Margaret Carney. From the receiver, we were able to buy the remaining inventory of furnaces, pipe and fittings, and the sheet metal shop equipment. We entered into a rental agreement month to month. There was always a possibility of the building being sold in its entirety, and we would be looking for a new location. Doc Reed and I handled the sales, and Russell Mitchell took care of the installation department. He was a wizard of a mechanic, handled his men well, and kept things running smooth in the installation department.